Something catastrophic is happening on California's most famous coastal road. Right now, this is not a drill. Highway 1 along Big Sur is collapsing again as massive sections of cliff are suddenly breaking loose and plunging into the Pacific. Drivers are stopping in shock as the ground beneath one of America's most iconic highways literally begins to move. Officials say more than 1,500 landslides are accelerating along this fragile coastline, and the destruction is spreading faster than crews can respond. Entire mountainsides are cracking, boulders the size of houses are tumbling down, and the road that clings to these cliffs is starting to disappear. Scientists are terrified by what's happening beneath the surface. And tonight, the danger may only be beginning. It starts without warning. Late morning along California's Highway 1, the coastal fog has just begun to lift from the cliffs of Big Sur. Drivers move slowly along the narrow highway, hugging the mountainside as the Pacific Ocean crashes hundreds of feet below. It's the kind of scene tourists travel thousands of miles to see. And then the mountain moves. A deep cracking sound echoes across the cliffs. At first it's subtle, like distant thunder trapped inside the rock. A few drivers glance up, confused. Then the ground shudders. Pebbles begin to bounce across the pavement. A small shower of dirt spills onto the shoulder of the highway. Cars slow down. Phones come out. Something doesn't look right. Suddenly, a section of the cliff face above the road splits open. Chunks of rock tear free from the mountainside and crash downward. The first boulders slam onto the asphalt with explosive force, sending dust and shattered stone flying across both lanes. Drivers slam on their brakes. One car swerves violently to avoid a rock the size of a refrigerator. Another driver throws their door open and runs toward the guardrail, staring up in disbelief. And then the real collapse begins. The mountainside releases. An entire slab of earth, trees, and rock begins sliding downward as if gravity has suddenly doubled. The sound is deafening, a grinding roar of stone ripping away from the cliff. A massive cascade of boulders barrels toward the highway. Some rocks crash directly onto the pavement, smashing through guardrails and bouncing toward the ocean below. Others explode into fragments as they hit the road, leaving behind craters and piles of debris. Dust erupts into the air, swallowing the road in a gray cloud. Drivers abandon their vehicles and run. Phones are recording everything now, the shaking ground, the falling rocks, the widening cracks spreading across the asphalt like lightning. And then something even more terrifying happens. The road itself begins to split. A jagged fracture opens across one lane of Highway 1. The pavement tilts slightly toward the cliff edge as the earth underneath shifts. Below, the Pacific churns violently against the base of the cliffs. Above, the mountain is still moving. Within minutes, emergency calls begin flooding dispatch centers across Monterey County. Highway 1, one of the most famous coastal roads in the world, is no longer stable. And this is only the beginning. As emergency crews rush toward Big Sur, geologists begin digging into the data. What they uncover is deeply unsettling. The cliffs above Highway 1 have been sending warning signals for weeks. Signals that, until now, seemed like ordinary coastal instability. Small rockfalls, minor slope shifts. Nothing unusual for a road carved into some of the steepest coastal terrain in North America. But looking at the numbers now, the pattern is impossible to ignore. The ground has been moving long before the dramatic collapse witnessed by drivers today. Satellite monitoring systems have been quietly tracking microscopic changes along the Big Sur mountainsides. From space, scientists can measure shifts in the Earth's surface, smaller than a human finger. Over the past month, those satellites have detected something alarming. The cliffs are slowly creeping toward the ocean. Sections of mountainside once considered stable are now shifting several inches at a time. In some areas, the movement appears to be accelerating daily. At first, the changes were almost invisible, but beneath the soil and vegetation, deep fractures have been spreading through the rock. Those fractures are now widening. On monitoring screens inside geological research offices, satellite images reveal long cracks slicing across entire slopes above. Highway 1. Some stretch hundreds of feet through the terrain, splitting sections of hillside into unstable blocks. The cliffs are essentially breaking into pieces, and gravity is pulling them toward the Pacific. Rainfall earlier in the season may have triggered the process. Weeks of moisture soaked into the loose soil and fractured rock along the coast, weakening the structure of the cliffs. But now, even with clear skies above Big Sur, the damage continues to unfold. Because once these slopes start moving, they rarely stop. The Pacific Ocean is also playing a brutal role in what's happening. Every day, powerful waves slam into the base of the cliffs hundreds of feet below the highway. Over decades, the ocean slowly erodes the foundation of the coastline, hollowing out weak points beneath the massive rock walls. Think of it like pulling blocks from the bottom of a tower. Eventually, the weight above has nowhere left to stand. That's when the collapse begins. And according to the newest monitoring data, that process may already be well underway across a massive stretch of coastline. Some slopes above Highway 1 are now showing clear signs of structural failure. Trees along the ridge lines are leaning at unnatural angles. Long fractures have opened across dirt access roads used by maintenance crews. In a few locations, entire patches of forest appear to be slowly sliding downhill. Scientists watching the data in real time begin using a word no one wants to hear: cascade. Once one landslide begins, it can destabilize the slopes around it, which means the collapse happening along Highway 1 today may not be the end of the danger. It could be the beginning of something much bigger, because across Big Sur's towering cliffs, the ground is still shifting, and the mountains may not be finished moving. By late afternoon, the situation along California's Highway 1 is no longer just a landslide. It is becoming a chain reaction. Emergency helicopters flying above the Big Sur coastline begin sending back chilling footage. From the air, the cliffs look scarred, long streaks of fresh earth cutting down the mountainsides, where rock and soil have already broken free. But the cameras capture something even more alarming. Several slopes are still moving. Entire sections of hillside appear to be slowly sagging downward toward the highway. At first, the movement is subtle. Then suddenly a portion of the cliff collapses again. A roaring avalanche of rock pours down the mountainside. Dust erupts hundreds of feet into the air as boulders smash across the pavement. The debris spreads across the highway like a tidal wave of stone. Below, the Pacific Ocean churns violently as some of the falling rocks crash directly into the water. This is no longer a single collapse. The avalanche zone is spreading. Across a stretch of coastline nearly 20 miles long, unstable slopes are beginning to fail one after another. Geologists monitoring the region realize that the cliffs above Highway 1 have become dangerously overloaded with loose rock and weakened soil. When one section falls, it shakes the slopes nearby. That vibration alone can trigger another collapse. Within hours, reports of fresh landslides began coming in from new locations along the highway. In one section north of Big Sur, a slab of earth nearly the size of a football field slides downward, ripping trees from the ground like toothpicks. In another area, a massive boulder breaks loose from the cliff wall and crashes onto the road, leaving behind a crater large enough to swallow a car. Highway maintenance crews watching from a safe distance realize something terrifying. Even areas that appear stable could fail at any moment. Cracks are spreading through the pavement. Guardrails are hanging over empty space where chunks of road have already fallen away. In some sections, the edge of the highway now ends abruptly in open air, and the cliffs above it are still groaning. The entire region has effectively turned into an avalanche corridor. Emergency officials expand the closure zone farther and farther along Highway 1, sealing off dozens of miles of road. But the landslides don't stop when the road closes. They continue falling. Rock after rock, slope after slope. The Big Sur mountains are shedding pieces of themselves into the ocean, and no one knows how much more of the coastline is about to give way. Because somewhere above the highway, more cliffs are already cracking, and gravity is still waiting. As the cliffs continue collapsing along Highway 1, a new and terrifying reality begins to unfold. People are trapped. Big Sur is one of the most remote stretches of coastline in California. Small communities, lodges, restaurants, and campgrounds are scattered along the narrow highway that snakes between towering cliffs and the open Pacific. For many of them, Highway 1 is the only road in or out. When the landslides begin, dozens of travelers are already on the highway. Some are tourists driving the famous coastal route. Others are local workers heading home. A few are delivery drivers bringing supplies to remote properties along the cliffs. Within minutes, traffic stops completely. To the north, sections of highway are buried under piles of rock and dirt. To the south, emergency crews have already blocked access as the danger spreads. Cars begin turning around, but many drivers quickly realize there is nowhere to go. Behind them, the road winds for miles along unstable cliffs. Ahead of them, fresh landslides are still crashing down. They are stuck between the mountain and the ocean. Some drivers step out of their vehicles and stare up at the cliffs towering above them, watching small stones continue to bounce down the slopes. Every new sound, a crack, a rumble, a shifting tree, sends waves of panic through the group. Phones come out again, but now the footage is different. This is no longer sightseeing. It's survival. Inside nearby communities, residents begin hearing the news spreading rapidly. Radio stations warn that Highway 1 is being shut down across large sections of the Big Sur coastline. Local businesses close their doors early as workers rush to check on family members stranded along the road. At small lodges perched above the ocean, guests gather near windows, watching clouds of dust rise from distant cliffs. Some people begin preparing for the possibility that they may not be able to leave for days. Fuel supplies are limited in the area. Grocery deliveries rely on the same highway now buried under rock. Emergency crews begin planning evacuations from isolated areas where additional landslides could cut off access completely. But the situation remains unpredictable. Helicopters circle overhead, scanning the mountainsides for new collapses. Below them, long lines of stranded vehicles stretch along the highway, waiting for instructions that haven't arrived yet. And as night begins creeping over the Pacific coastline, the sounds of shifting rock still echo from the cliffs. For everyone trapped along Highway 1 tonight, one terrifying question hangs in the air. What happens if the mountain comes down again? By nightfall, the crisis along California's Highway 1 has reached a breaking point. Emergency crews are everywhere. Highway patrol, state transportation teams, search units, geologists, all racing along the coastline trying to assess the damage. But the truth becomes clear very quickly. The situation is spiraling beyond control. Heavy machinery begins arriving at several of the worst landslide zones. Bulldozers attempt to push away piles of rock that have buried entire lanes of highway. Excavators claw at debris fields where trees, mud, and shattered boulders have fused into thick walls of rubble. But every time crews begin clearing one collapse, another one starts somewhere else. High above the road, more rock is still falling. Small slides trigger larger ones. A few minutes of quiet are suddenly shattered by the violent rumble of another slope breaking loose. Emergency teams are forced to retreat repeatedly as fresh debris crashes down the cliffs. It becomes clear that repairing the highway right now is impossible. Engineers walk the damaged sections of pavement under floodlights, documenting what remains of the road. What they find is worse than expected. In multiple locations, the foundation beneath Highway 1 has been compromised. The road was originally carved into the side of steep mountains, supported by layers of compacted soil and rock. But now those layers are shifting. Entire slabs of asphalt are sagging outward toward the ocean. In some places, the edge of the highway has already disappeared completely. Guardrails hang over empty air where the cliff has crumbled away beneath them. Cracks are spreading across the pavement in long, jagged lines, some wide enough to swallow a tire. Engineers step carefully, aware that the ground beneath their boots may not be stable. For decades, Highway 1 has survived earthquakes, storms, and smaller landslides. But tonight feels different. Transportation officials begin quietly discussing the possibility that entire sections of the highway may have to remain closed for months, possibly longer. The scale of destruction is simply too large. Even if crews clear the debris, the cliffs above the road remain dangerously unstable. More landslides could happen at any moment. And as emergency crews continue surveying the coastline, a troubling realization spreads through the command centers monitoring the disaster. The collapse of Highway 1 may not just be a temporary crisis. It may be the beginning of a much larger failure along the Big Sur coastline, because the mountains towering above the road are still shifting, and no one knows where the next collapse will strike. As dawn approaches over the shattered coastline of Big Sur, the immediate danger may appear to be fading. The roaring landslides slow, the dust clouds settle. For the first time in hours, parts of the mountains fall quiet. But inside the emergency command centers monitoring the disaster, scientists are not breathing easier. They are watching the data, and the numbers are still moving. Across the Big Sur coastline, monitoring sensors continue detecting subtle ground shifts deep within the cliffs. The movements are small, sometimes just fractions of an inch, but they are happening across a wide stretch of the mountainside. That pattern worries geologists more than the landslides themselves, because it suggests something much larger may be happening beneath the surface. The cliffs along Highway 1 are not a single solid wall of rock. They are a complex system of fractured layers, sediment, soil, and ancient stone stacked together over millions of years. When those layers begin to weaken, entire sections of coastline can slowly start sliding toward the ocean. Not just a single landslide, an entire mountainside. Scientists studying the newest satellite images now see troubling signs of that exact process, beginning in several areas. Huge sections of cliff appear to be creeping forward, extremely slowly but steadily. If that movement continues, the consequences could be enormous. Entire portions of Highway 1 could vanish permanently. Coastal ridges could collapse in massive avalanches, sending millions of tons of rock crashing into the Pacific. The sudden displacement of that much debris could even trigger dangerous coastal waves along parts of the shoreline. For now, those worst-case scenarios remain uncertain. But the warning signs are there, and the danger is far from over. Because what's happening along Big Sur is not a single disaster. It's part of a much larger battle between land, water, and gravity, a coastline constantly trying to reshape itself. Highway 1 was built along one of the most beautiful landscapes in the world, but that beauty hides a brutal truth. The mountains here are always moving, slowly, relentlessly, and after tonight's collapse, one question continues haunting the scientists watching the shifting ground. How much of the Big Sur coastline is still waiting to fall?